Most people fall asleep on a train and wake up at the end of the line. I fell asleep. And the train kept going, not faster, not slower, just forward through places that didn't exist on any map I had ever seen. And the strange thing is, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like the place I had always been headed. If you're listening to this while the day is still clinging to you, let it loosen its grip. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. Just ride along. And if this story carries you somewhere quiet, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Before we begin, there's a small tradition on this train. If the story feels like a place you'd like to return to, tap the like button. It's how this world knows you were here. If you'd like more journeys like this, subscribe and the doors will open for you again. And if you wake up in the middle of the night with a thought, a dream, or a place you wish existed, leave it in the comments. Sometimes the train listens. Now settle back, the lights are low. The windows are wide, and the night is moving. I remember boarding the train because I was tired in a way sleep alone couldn't fix. The station had been nearly empty, the kind of place that feels forgotten by clocks. A single platform stretched into darkness, its concrete edges softened by years of quiet. Overhead, a few dim lamps hummed, casting pale halos on the ground. There was no crowd, no rush, no voice calling out departures, only the distant sound of wind threading through steel. I hadn't known where the train was going. I only knew I didn't want to stay where I was. When it arrived, it did so without drama. No screech of brakes, no burst of light. It simply appeared, a long line of dark carriages gliding beside the platform as if it had always been there, and I had only just noticed. The doors opened, warm air drifted out, carrying the faint scent of polished wood and something softer beneath it, like old books or rain on fabric. Inside, the lights glowed amber, gentle on the eyes. The seats were wide and cushioned, their fabric worn smooth by countless travelers who had leaned back and let go. I stepped inside without thinking. The door closed behind me with a quiet, final sound, not a lock, but a decision. The train moved. At first I sat upright, watching the platform slide away. The station lamps blurred, then vanished, replaced by darkness broken only by passing hints of landscape, trees, hills, rivers, all slipping by like half-remembered dreams. Minutes passed, or hours. The rhythm of the train was steady, unhurried. A soft rocking, like breathing. No conductor came to ask for a ticket. No voice announced the next stop. I began to feel as though time itself had taken a seat somewhere far down the car and closed its eyes. Eventually, my shoulders loosened. My hands unclenched. The tiredness I had carried for days, maybe longer, started to dissolve into the cushions beneath me. I must have fallen asleep, because when I opened my eyes again, the world outside the window had changed. The night was no longer empty. It was filled. Stars stretched across the sky in slow, drifting patterns, not fixed the way stars should be, but moving gently, as if the heavens themselves were part of the journey. Below them, the land glowed faintly, fields lit by moonlight, rivers like silver threads, forests breathing in shadow and calm. The train continued forward. I waited for a stop that never came. At first, I assumed I had simply missed my station. It happens. You close your eyes, the world moves on without you. But as more time passed, a strange certainty settled in me. This train did not end. It did not hurry toward a destination. It did not belong to morning. I rose from my seat and walked down the aisle. The car was quiet, but not empty. Other passengers sat scattered throughout, each in their own gentle stillness. Some gazed out at the drifting night. Some rested with eyes closed, faces peaceful. None seemed anxious. None seemed in a hurry to arrive. It was as if everyone here understood something I had only begun to feel. I stopped beside a window and rested my palm against the glass. It was warm. The landscape outside shifted again. Now the train passed over water, a vast, calm sea that reflected the stars so perfectly it was impossible to tell where sky ended and ocean began. The rails extended across the surface, as if the world itself had made way for this passage. I felt no fear, only a deep, unfamiliar relief. Somewhere in the distance, a bell chimed. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft note that seemed to say, "You are exactly where you are meant to be." I returned to my seat. The train carried on, and for the first time in a very long while, I didn't wonder how far it would go. I wondered what it might show me next. The train seemed to notice my curiosity, or perhaps it simply responded to the quiet way I leaned toward the window, because the world beyond the glass began to change again, slowly, like a thought forming. The sea faded into mist, and the rails glided over land once more, rolling hills covered in tall grass that shimmered under starlight. Small lights appeared in the distance, scattered and warm, like fireflies that had decided to become homes. A town was coming into view, though no station appeared, no sign, no name. The train did not slow. It never did. Yet as we passed, I could see streets winding between low buildings, windows glowing softly, doors standing open as if waiting for someone who had not arrived yet. I felt a gentle pull in my chest, not the ache of missing out, but the calm understanding that this place was not for me, not now. It was for someone else, someone who would open their eyes at the right moment and find themselves exactly where they needed to be. A presence settled into the seat across from me. I hadn't heard footsteps, I hadn't seen anyone approach, and yet there they were, an older traveler, wrapped in a simple coat the color of dusk. Their hair was silver, not with age alone, but with the kind of sheen moonlight gives to calm water. Their eyes held a depth that suggested many nights, many journeys, many beginnings without endings. "You're new," they said, their voice low and kind, like a library after closing. "I think so," I replied. The words came easily, without hesitation. On this train, honesty felt effortless. They smiled. Most are the first time. I wanted to ask where we were going. I wanted to ask how long the journey would take. I wanted to ask why this place felt more real than the world I had left behind. But none of those questions felt urgent. Instead, I asked the only thing that truly mattered. "Does it ever stop?" The traveler shook their head gently. "Not in the way you mean." They gestured toward the window. Outside, the town was already slipping away, replaced by open fields and drifting fog. It pauses in different forms, it changes, it opens doors, but it doesn't end. It carries those who need to move without the pressure of arrival. I considered this. In my old world, everything was measured by arrival, deadlines, destinations, endpoints. Even rest was something to reach, not something you were allowed to drift into. And people just stay, I asked. Some do. They said, some leave, some only ride for a while, long enough to remember how to breathe without counting. They stood, smoothing their coat. You'll know when it's time for you to step off. Until then, let the motion do the work. With that, they moved on, dissolving into the quiet of the car as if they had always been part of it. I leaned back again, letting the steady rhythm of the rails carry me. The train hummed, a sound that felt less like machinery and more like a living thing at rest. The lights overhead dimmed slightly, responding to something unseen, perhaps the collective need for softer edges. Outside, the landscape became a forest. Tall trees arched overhead, their branches interlacing above the tracks, forming a tunnel of shadow and starlight. Leaves whispered in a wind that never quite touched the train. Occasionally, glowing shapes drifted between the trunks, slow-moving lights that resembled lanterns carried by invisible hands. They hovered, then faded, as if guiding travelers who walked paths parallel to the rails. I imagined stepping off, following one of those lights into the trees, finding a clearing where a small home waited, warm and quiet. I imagined staying there for a while, not forever, just long enough to remember who I was when no one needed anything from me. The thought did not make me restless. It made me calm. The train continued, time softened. Minutes stretched into something gentler. My breathing matched the sway of the car, With each exhale, the weight of the day I had left behind seemed less important, less real. The worries I had carried like heavy bags slipped from my hands one by one. At some point, I realized I could no longer remember the exact shape of my old room, the color of its walls, the sound of its clock. Those details blurred, replaced by the glow of these windows, the hush of these seats, the quiet companionship of strangers who asked nothing of me. I was not losing myself. I was setting something down. Ahead, the forest began to thin. The trees gave way to open sky, and in the distance, a new horizon formed, wide and pale, as if dawn were thinking about existing. But the light did not grow, it hovered. The train did not slow, and somewhere deep within me, a truth settled. This journey was not about reaching morning. It was about learning how to rest inside the endless night. The pale horizon lingered at the edge of sight, neither advancing nor fading, like a promise that had learned patience. The train glided toward it without urgency, and I realized that even light here obeyed different rules. It did not chase the night away, it simply shared the sky. Inside the car, a few passengers shifted in their seats, not in restlessness, but in the gentle way people move when they are becoming comfortable with where they are. Someone turned a page in a book. Someone else drew a blanket higher over their shoulders. The small sounds of human presence blended with the steady rhythm of motion, forming a quiet language of belonging. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. Beneath the hum of the rails, there was another sound, soft, almost imagined. A low, distant music, like wind passing through chimes hidden in a faraway place. It rose and fell with no pattern I could follow, and yet it felt familiar, as though I had heard it in childhood dreams, back when sleep was effortless, and nights were not something to endure. When I opened my eyes again, the forest had given way to a wide plain of water dotted with small islands. Each island held a single structure, a lighthouse, a cottage, a tower, a quiet house with a porch light glowing. None of them were large, none of them were grand. They looked like places built for one person at a time. Refuge, not spectacle. The train curved gently, weaving between these scattered havens, and I felt the faintest echo of choice ripple through me. Any one of them could be an ending. Any one of them could be a pause, but I remained where I was. Not because I was afraid to leave, because, for once, I did not feel chased by the need to arrive. A small table folded out from the arm of my seat. I hadn't noticed it before. On it sat a cup of something warm, releasing a slow, comforting steam. I did not question how it got there. I wrapped my hands around it and felt warmth seep into me, through my palms, through my chest, into places that had been cold for longer than I could remember. The scent was gentle, herbs, rain, a hint of sweetness. It tasted like evenings without obligation. Across the aisle, a child slept with their head against a window, their reflection layered over the passing stars. A woman nearby hummed under her breath, a melody without words. The train was full of stories that did not need telling, lives that did not require explanation. I wondered how many people had ridden these rails before me, how many had boarded on nights when the world felt too loud, how many had stepped off when they were ready to carry quiet back with them. The thought that I was part of something vast and unseen did not make me small. It made me held. Outside, the islands drifted away, replaced by open sky once more. The pale horizon softened, dissolving back into a deep, endless blue. The stars rearranged themselves in slow, deliberate patterns, as if drawing maps meant only for those who traveled without clocks. The train continued. And somewhere ahead, far beyond urgency, far beyond fear, another place was already forming, waiting to be discovered by someone who had learned how to let go. The car lights dimmed again, not into darkness, but into a gentler version of themselves, as if the train were tucking its passengers in. Shadows softened, edges blurred. Even the windows seemed to breathe, fogging faintly with the warmth inside before clearing to reveal another stretch of impossible night. I felt myself drifting in that space between thought and dream, where ideas no longer demanded shape. The motion of the train carried me the way water carries a leaf, not with force, but with certainty. I realized then that nothing here was accidental. Every mile, every star, every quiet presence was part of a design meant to ease, not impress. The world beyond the glass unfolded into rolling dunes of pale sand that shimmered like powdered moonlight, their curves endless and calm. No footprints marked them. No storms disturbed them. They existed only to be seen, only to remind the traveler that vastness could be gentle. I imagined walking there someday, feeling that soft ground beneath my feet, knowing I would leave no trace, and that no trace was required. The train passed on, leaving the dunes undisturbed, and I understood that this journey was teaching me something simple and rare. That moving forward did not have to mean escaping, that rest could exist even in motion. And that sometimes the most important destination is the feeling of being carried without being asked where you're going. A gentle vibration passed through the floor, not a jolt, not a warning, just a subtle shift, like the train clearing its throat before speaking. The dunes outside faded into a wide expanse of water again, but this time the surface mirrored more than stars. It reflected scenes, fleeting and translucent, as though memories themselves were drifting beneath us. I saw a kitchen lit by early morning sun, a quiet street after rain. A bedroom with curtains moving in a soft breeze. They were ordinary places, and yet each carried the weight of a life paused inside it. I understood without being told. These were moments left behind by travelers, fragments of days they had stepped away from. The train did not erase them. It simply held them gently, the way a tide holds shells. I wondered what pieces of my own world had begun to float there. Perhaps a desk with papers still waiting. Perhaps a window I had looked through one last time without knowing it was a last. The thought did not ache. It felt like setting down a coat in a warm room, knowing it would be there when I needed it again. The aisle glowed faintly as small lamps along the floor brightened, guiding anyone who wished to walk. A few passengers rose and moved quietly, stretching, whispering, trading soft smiles. The train was awake in the way a house is awake at night, alive, attentive, protective of sleep. Somewhere farther down the car, a door slid open and closed, releasing a hush of cooler air. I sensed other cars beyond this one, other stories unfolding in parallel, each traveler carried in their own private calm. I leaned my head back and let the rhythm count my breaths for me, in and out, forward and onward. The need to monitor time loosened its grip. There was no next appointment here. No clock waiting to accuse me. Only the promise of another place forming slowly ahead, shaped by quiet rather than demand. And as the train moved on through its endless night, I felt certain of one thing. Wherever it took me next would not ask me to hurry. It would simply open, the way a door opens in a dream, already knowing I belong. The transition into the next stretch of the journey was so gentle I almost missed it. There was no announcement, no chime, no shift in speed. Only a quiet change in the air, as if the train had entered a different thought. The reflections on the water outside dissolved, and in their place rose a valley bathed in deep blue twilight. Mountains rested on either side, their peaks lost in cloud, their slopes dotted with small glowing windows. Each light felt intentional, like a heartbeat in the dark. The tracks curved downward, and for the first time since I had boarded, the train seemed to descend, not toward an ending, but into something hidden. I sensed that this place was different from the others. It did not feel like a passing dream. It felt like a threshold. The valley opened slowly, revealing a town built along a winding river. Bridges arched over the water in elegant lines. Lanterns floated above narrow streets, suspended by nothing I could see. The buildings were close together, as if they shared warmth, and every doorway stood open. Yet the train did not slow. It glided above the river on a narrow ribbon of rail, offering only a long, unbroken view. A quiet understanding settled in me. This was a place where many people stepped off. I felt it in the way the air shifted, in the subtle wakefulness that moved through the car. A few passengers rose from their seats, not hurried, not reluctant, just ready. They gathered their things, small bags, folded blankets, a book held close to the chest. Their movements were unspoken goodbyes. The silver-haired traveler appeared again, standing at the end of the aisle. "This is a resting city," they said softly, as if naming it might wake it. "For those who need to stay a while, some arrive here and don't remember where they came from. Others remember everything, but finally feel safe enough to stop carrying it." A door along the side of the car slid open, revealing a narrow platform suspended above the river. The train did not halt. Instead, it matched the motion of the city, allowing travelers to step off as though the world itself were moving with them. One by one, they did. Each person who left seemed lighter than when they had boarded. Not because they had lost something, but because they had chosen where to set it down. I remained seated, not because I was afraid, because I wanted to understand what came after. The traveler looked at me with gentle recognition. "You're not done yet," they said. "I don't know what I'm waiting for," I admitted. They smiled. Neither did any of us the first time. "The train will teach you. It always does." The door closed. The city slipped behind us, its lanterns blending back into stars, and the train carried me onward, deeper into a journey that had only just begun. Beyond the valley, the land rose again, smoothing into wide hills covered in tall, silver grass that swayed in waves no wind could be seen to make. The sky above softened into a deep indigo, layered with slow-moving clouds that glowed faintly from within, as though they carried their own quiet light. The train moved between these hills like a thought passing through a dream, unchallenged, unobserved. I felt a subtle shift inside myself, a loosening that went deeper than muscles, deeper than breath. It was the feeling of being allowed to continue without explanation. I realized that, in the world I had left, movement always demanded justification. You traveled for work, for duty, for survival. Even rest had to be earned. Here, motion existed for its own sake. It was not progress. It was presence. Across the aisle, the child stirred and opened their eyes. They looked around with the calm curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of the unknown. Our eyes met. They smiled once, small and sincere, then turned back to the window, content to simply watch the hills drift by. I envied that ease. Then I recognized it in myself. The train did not promise answers, it offered space. And in that space, something I had forgotten how to do began to return. I stopped bracing. I stopped preparing. I let the journey be enough. The rhythm of the rails settled deeper into me, no longer something I noticed, but something I belonged to. Each sway of the car felt like a gentle affirmation that I was being carried, that I did not need to hold myself upright in the world anymore. Outside, the silver grass gave way to wide plains of dark soil dotted with pools of reflected starlight. These mirrors of sky lay scattered across the land, as if the earth itself had decided to remember what it was once part of. The train passed between them, and in each reflection I caught a glimpse of myself, not as I had been in the waking world, tense and incomplete, but as I was here. Unguarded, whole in a quiet way, a soft warmth gathered around me as though the air itself had learned my shape. I realized that I could stay awake as long as I wished, or sleep without losing anything. The story would continue whether I watched it or not. There was no fear of missing out, because nothing here could be lost. Every place, every moment, would exist again somewhere along these endless rails. I thought of the resting city in the valley, of those who had stepped off with gentle certainty. Their choice did not feel like an ending. It felt like another form of travel. I understood then that this train was not taking anyone away from life. It was teaching them how to return to it differently. The hills thinned, and far ahead, a new glow began to form, not bright, not urgent, just present. Another place was assembling itself in the distance, patient and unafraid of time. I did not lean forward. I did not ask what it would be. I let it come. The train moved on, and I moved with it, no longer a passenger escaping something, but a traveler learning how to stay. The glow ahead grew slowly, not in brightness but in definition, as if the horizon were sketching itself into existence. It did not resemble dawn. There was no promise of day in it, no sharp edge of time pressing forward. Instead, it unfolded like a memory, soft, layered, patient. Shapes began to emerge within it, tall arches, suspended walkways, vast open spaces that felt both indoor and infinite. The train approached what appeared to be a city, yet unlike the resting valley, this place hovered above the land, held aloft by pillars of light that faded into mist before touching the ground. It was neither above nor below, neither sky nor earth. It existed between. A hush moved through the car, not of concern, but of recognition. Some passengers lifted their heads. Others smiled faintly, as if greeting an old companion. I felt no urgency to stand, yet my attention sharpened. This place felt significant, not because it demanded anything, but because it offered something unnamed. As we drew closer, I saw that the city was built of terraces and open halls, each layer drifting slightly apart from the next, like thoughts that had learned to float. Water flowed gently through its center, forming long, quiet rivers that reflected the structure above them. Bridges crossed those rivers in slow arcs. Lamps glowed along the edges, their light neither warm nor cold, but perfectly balanced between. The train did not slow, it never did. But a wide opening appeared along our side, a corridor of air that matched our speed perfectly, as though the city itself had leaned in to walk beside us. Along that corridor, doors opened, not all at once, one by one. Each door revealed a different path into the floating world. A man near the front rose and stepped forward. He paused only long enough to rest his hand against the wall of the car, as if thanking it. Then he crossed the invisible threshold and vanished into a bridge of light that carried him inward. A woman followed, then another traveler, each leaving without drama, without hesitation. I felt the faint pull again, not longing, invitation. The silver-haired traveler stood nearby, watching the departures with a quiet satisfaction. "This is a city of questions," they said, "not answers. People come here when they've forgotten what they're allowed to wonder." I turned to them. What do they find? They considered this. Not solutions, space, time, the right kind of silence, the kind that lets a thought finally finish itself. Another passenger stood, a younger woman, her eyes tired but hopeful. She gave me a small nod before stepping through a door shaped like a narrow archway of light. The city received her without sound. I remained seated again. But this time I felt the reason forming. It was no longer uncertainty. It was trust. I trusted the train. I trusted that when it was time, I would not need to be told. The doors closed. The corridor of air dissolved. The floating city drifted backward, becoming once more a glow, then a suggestion, then a memory. The train continued into open night. And I understood. This journey was not about collecting places. It was about learning which ones you were ready to carry. The space beyond the floating city felt wider than anything before it, as though the night itself had stretched open to make room for thought. Stars thinned into distant clusters, leaving broad corridors of darkness between them. The train moved through this openness without resistance, its motion steady, unchallenged. I felt as if we had entered a place meant for reflection rather than scenery, a passage where the mind could unfold without distraction. Inside the car, silence deepened, but it was not empty. It carried weight, like a blanket laid carefully over the world. Even the hum of the rails softened, becoming a low presence rather than a sound. I realized that I could no longer tell how long I had been riding. The concept of duration had lost its edges. Time was no longer something I stood inside of. It had become something that drifted around me. I thought of the places I had passed, the resting city, the islands of solitary light, the silver hills. None of them had asked me to stay, none had demanded departure. They existed as offerings, not destinations, and in that they felt more real than any place I had rushed toward before. A realization settled gently. The train did not choose where people belonged, it taught them how to recognize it. Across the aisle, the child slept again, their breath slow and even. Their small hand rested against the glass, as though touching the stars beyond it. I watched the rise and fall of their chest and felt something loosen in me, a quiet grief for how early we learn to harden, and a quiet hope that perhaps we can always unlearn it. The darkness ahead began to gather into shape, not a city, not a landscape, a horizon of movement. The air beyond the window shimmered faintly, like heat above stone, and within that shimmer, paths appeared, countless lines of motion branching outward in gentle arcs. They did not look like rails. They looked like possibilities. The train did not slow. But I sensed that we were nearing a place not meant for stopping, a place meant for choosing. The transition into the third stretch of the journey felt different from all the others. There was no change in scenery at first, no new landscape forming beyond the glass. Instead, the train passed through a veil so subtle I might have mistaken it for a blink. The air shifted, not in temperature, not in pressure, only in quality, as though the night itself had turned a page. The branching paths I had glimpsed before resolved into a vast expanse of open sky, threaded with slow-moving currents of light. These were not roads, not rails, not bridges. They flowed like rivers through the air, curving gently, diverging and rejoining in patterns too patient to be random. Each stream carried a faint glow, and within that glow drifted images, moments, memories, possibilities. I saw a person standing at the edge of a field at sunset, a hand reaching for another across a table, a door being opened in a quiet house. None of these scenes lasted more than a breath, yet each felt complete. The train did not follow any one path. It moved among them, gliding between futures that had not yet learned how to exist. I became aware of a subtle presence around me, not a figure, not a voice, but a sense of being observed in the kindest possible way, as if the journey itself were paying attention. The car remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It felt expectant, not in urgency, but in awareness. I realized that this place was not meant to be seen only, it was meant to be felt. The streams of light beyond the window pulsed slowly, like breathing veins of time. Each carried a direction without demand. I sensed that any one of them could become a life, not a fantasy, not a dream. A continuation. The silver-haired traveler appeared once more, though this time they did not stand. They sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of their presence without it intruding. "This is where the train teaches its deepest lesson," they said. I did not ask what that lesson was. I was beginning to understand. In the waking world, they continued, people think choice is loud. They expect it to arrive with urgency, with pressure, with the feeling of standing on the edge of something sharp. But real choice is quiet. It feels like recognition. They gestured toward the window. Every one of those paths exists because someone somewhere will one day be ready to walk it. Do they know? I asked. Not in words. They feel it the way you feel rest when you finally lie down. The way you feel hunger when you've forgotten to eat. It's not instruction. It's alignment. A passenger farther down the car stood slowly, as if guided by something internal rather than external. They approached a door that had not existed moments before. It opened without sound, revealing a thin bridge of light that connected to one of the flowing paths outside. The passenger paused only a moment, then stepped forward and was gone. No applause followed, no farewell, just a quiet continuation. I felt the familiar pull again, but this time it reached deeper, not toward a place, toward a becoming, The traveler looked at me, their eyes gentle. "You don't have to go now," they said, "and you don't have to stay. The train doesn't measure worth by movement, only by honesty." I closed my eyes. Not to sleep, to listen inward. In the stillness behind my thoughts, something stirred. Not a plan, not a goal, a direction without language, a sense of where I was meant to lean. When I opened my eyes, the paths outside had shifted. One stream of light now passed closer than the others, its glow warmer, its movement slower. Within it, I saw no specific scene, only a feeling I recognized: quiet mornings, unrushed evenings, a life that left room to breathe. The door near me did not open, the train did not slow. But I understood. This was not a place that forced departure. It was a place that taught you how to recognize when staying on the train was no longer movement, and when stepping off was not an ending, but a continuation of the same journey, just in another form. The paths of light began to thin behind us, dissolving back into open night, but the feeling they had stirred did not fade. It lingered inside me like a quiet echo, not urging, not insisting, simply present. The train moved onward, and the world outside softened again into wide, star-filled dark, yet something in me had shifted. I was no longer merely being carried. I was becoming aware of how I carried myself. The silver-haired traveler did not speak again. They rose with the unremarkable grace of someone who had done this many times before and drifted down the aisle, leaving me with a silence that felt intentional, not empty, spacious. The car seemed larger now, as though my perception of it had expanded. The ceiling arched higher. The windows felt wider, even the seats appeared less confining. I realized that nothing physical had changed, only my relationship to it had. I leaned back and let my gaze wander. Other passengers sat in their own quiet awareness. Some slept, some stared out at the moving night. A few wrote in small notebooks, their pens gliding slowly, as though the act itself were part of their journey. No one looked rushed, no one appeared lost. Each person seemed suspended in the exact amount of motion they needed. The train passed through a region of sky where stars gathered in loose spirals, turning slowly around invisible centers. Their movement was not dramatic. It was patient, the kind of motion that could continue for centuries without exhausting itself. Watching them, I felt my own inner rotation slow. Thoughts that once chased each other began to drift. Concerns that had defined entire days in my waking life now appeared small, distant, like lights seen from high above. I understood then that this train did not take people away from their lives. It returned them to themselves. Not the self shaped by schedules and expectations, but the quieter one, the one that existed before urgency learned how to speak. A memory surfaced, uninvited and gentle. I was young, lying on the floor of a room lit by late afternoon sun, watching dust drift through a beam of light. I had been content without reason. Time had felt endless, not because it stretched far ahead, but because I had not yet learned to count it. That feeling, long buried beneath years of motion, now returned in a new form, not as nostalgia, as recognition. The train continued through a wide expanse of darkness that felt neither empty nor full. It was simply open, and in that openness, I realized I did not need to decide anything yet. The paths of light had shown me that choice did not require force. It would arrive as a quiet knowing, the way sleep arrives when you stop trying to reach it. For now, it was enough to ride, enough to breathe, enough to be carried without apology. And as the endless night unfolded ahead, I felt certain of one thing. Wherever this journey eventually led me, I would arrive not as someone escaping a life, but as someone returning to it, slowly, gently, and entirely my own. The darkness ahead began to change in texture, as if the night were learning a new way to exist. It grew softer, layered, almost tangible, like velvet stretched across an infinite sky. Within it, faint outlines formed, arches of shadow, distant contours that suggested mountains made of silence rather than stone. The train entered this region without hesitation, and I felt a subtle pressure in my chest, not of fear, but of depth. This was a place where the world did not distract. It listened. Even the stars seemed reluctant to intrude here. They thinned to a few distant sparks, leaving most of the sky unlit. Yet the darkness did not feel empty. It felt attentive, as though it were holding space for something that did not yet have a shape. Inside the car, no one spoke. The hush was complete, but alive. I became aware of my own breathing again, not because it was loud, but because it finally had room to be heard. Each inhale felt deliberate. Each exhale felt like a release I had postponed for years. The train slowed, not in speed, but in sensation. Motion remained, yet it no longer pulled. It cradled. I closed my eyes. Behind them, images surfaced without urgency. Faces I had loved, places I had left. Moments that had once seemed small, now glowing with quiet importance. None of them demanded anything from me. They appeared, lingered, and drifted away, as gentle as the passing landscapes beyond the window. I understood that this stretch of the journey was not meant to show me where I could go. It was meant to remind me of where I had been, not in regret, in wholeness. When I opened my eyes again, the darkness outside had shifted once more. Far ahead, a faint glow began to gather, not a city, not a path, but a single steady light. It did not beckon. It waited. The train moved toward it, and for the first time I felt no difference between riding and arriving. The solitary light grew slowly, not brighter but nearer, as though distance itself were yielding. It hovered within the darkness like a held breath, steady and unafraid of the vastness around it. As the train approached, the light revealed itself not as a destination, but as a small structure suspended in open night, a single room floating with wide windows and a door that stood open. Inside, I could see nothing but warmth, no furniture, no figure. Just a soft, living glow, the kind that feels like a memory of home rather than a place you can point to on a map. No door opened in the car, no signal was given. Yet I felt the same quiet invitation I had felt before, deeper now, more intimate. This was not a city for many. It was not a path for becoming. It was a pause meant for one, not an ending, a breath. I did not stand. And in that, I learned something essential. Readiness does not always mean movement. Sometimes it means knowing you are not yet finished becoming who you will be when you arrive. The train carried me past the small, glowing room, and it drifted behind us without sorrow, as though it understood. The darkness softened again, and stars returned in gentle constellations. The car lights warmed. The world resumed its quiet unfolding. I felt no regret. Only gratitude for the invitation, and for the honesty that let me decline without fear. The train continued, and I rode on, no longer wondering where it would take me, but trusting that when the moment came, I would recognize myself in the place that opened. The night widened once more, but it no longer felt endless in the way it once had. It felt spacious, like a room finally cleared of unnecessary furniture. The train moved through it with the same steady grace, yet something in me now moved differently. I was not simply passing through scenes anymore. I was listening to the spaces between them, the pauses, the quiet meanings that lived beneath motion. Outside, the stars arranged themselves into slow, drifting patterns that resembled constellations only briefly before dissolving again, as if the sky itself refused to be fixed. Watching them, I understood that permanence was not required for truth. Some things were real precisely because they changed. Inside the car, a few passengers stirred, some waking, some settling deeper into sleep, each carried in their own rhythm. I felt a gentle continuity linking us all, every traveler, every place we had passed, every choice made and unmade. The train did not separate these things, it wove them. And as I rested within that weaving, I realized that this journey was no longer something happening to me. It was something unfolding with me. Wherever I would one day step off, I would not be leaving the train behind. I would be carrying its quiet forward, into rooms, into mornings, into the ordinary spaces where life waits to be lived slowly. The night flowed on, the rails whispered beneath us, and I remained exactly where I was meant to be, not because I had arrived, but because I had finally learned how to ride. The fourth stretch of the journey began without ceremony. There was no boundary, no moment that announced itself as different, and yet I felt it immediately. The air in the car carried a new texture, like morning mist before it learns what shape the day will take. The windows no longer reflected only stars. They began to show depth, layers within layers, like looking into a lake that held other skies beneath its surface. The train moved into a realm where distance folded inward, where faraway places felt close enough to touch if one only leaned slightly forward. Beyond the glass, vast fields appeared, not of grass or sand, but of light so soft it seemed woven rather than cast. They stretched outward in gentle curves, dotted with small figures moving slowly, travelers on foot, walking paths that did not intersect yet somehow belonged together. Each carried a faint glow, not from any lamp but from within. Their steps were unhurried, no one followed, no one led. It was movement without pursuit. I watched them and felt a question rise in me, quiet and unafraid. What would it be like to walk without needing to arrive? The train did not answer. It simply carried me alongside the possibility. Inside, the car felt warmer. The fabric of the seats held the comfort of long use. A soft fragrance lingered in the air, like clean linen and distant rain. I realized that I had stopped scanning for change. I no longer waited for the next city, the next path, the next invitation. The journey itself had become enough, not as escape, as presence. A subtle awareness passed through the passengers like a shared breath. Some lifted their heads, others smiled faintly in their sleep. No one spoke. The train seemed to be guiding us through a place that required gentleness, a place where even thought needed to slow outside. The walking figures gradually faded, dissolving into the fields of light until only the open expanse remained. The horizon curved inward, forming a wide, embracing arc. It did not call me forward, it held me where I was. And in that still motion, I felt something rare settle inside me. The understanding that rest is not the absence of movement, but the freedom from being chased by it. The train glided along the edge of that luminous expanse, as though respecting its quiet. And I sensed that this part of the journey was meant to teach a different kind of attention. Not the alertness of watching for danger, nor the focus of striving toward a goal, but the gentle awareness of simply being present. The light outside did not shine, it rested. It did not demand to be seen, it waited. I found myself breathing more slowly, not because I tried, but because the world no longer rushed me. Thoughts drifted through my mind like leaves on calm water, each one touching briefly, then moving on without disturbance. I realized how often, in the waking world, I had mistaken urgency for importance, speed for meaning. Here, nothing hurried, yet everything felt deeply significant. The train did not need to prove that it was moving. Existence itself was enough. A woman 2 seats ahead stirred and opened her eyes. She looked around with the soft confusion of someone waking from a peaceful dream, then settled again, comforted by the familiarity of motion. In that small moment, I saw the truth of this place. It did not replace life. It rehearsed it in a kinder rhythm. The way the train carried us was the way time could carry us if we allowed it, not with pressure, with patience. Outside, the light began to thin, gathering into long, flowing bands that curved gently away from our path. They resembled rivers seen from great height, each one moving toward an unseen sea. I felt no desire to follow them. It was enough to know they existed. The train continued forward, and I remained within its quiet promise, learning that peace does not arrive all at once. It reveals itself in layers, in moments, in the simple act of staying where you are without needing to be elsewhere. The bands of light outside slowly unraveled, returning the sky to a deeper blue. and within that blue, shapes began to form that resembled distant hills made of mist. They did not rise sharply, they flowed like thoughts that never hardened into edges. The train entered this softened terrain, and I felt as though we were moving through a landscape built from breath itself. Even gravity seemed gentler here, nothing pressed downward. Everything hovered in quiet balance. I imagined stepping off and finding that my feet would barely touch the ground, that each step would be more suggestion than impact. The idea did not feel unreal. It felt kind. Inside the car, the lamps along the aisle dimmed further, casting a warm, twilight glow. The world within the train mirrored the world beyond it. Both had learned how to be gentle. A man near the window leaned his forehead against the glass, not in weariness, but in comfort. Another passenger traced slow circles on the armrest, as if mapping a memory. No one looked lost. No one looked finished. We were all simply becoming, at a pace that did not require effort. I realized then that the train was not carrying us through places. It was carrying us through states of being. Each realm we passed reflected a way of existing, resting, choosing, remembering, releasing. The journey was not outward. It was inward, layered across motion. The landscapes were mirrors, not destinations. Beyond the window, the mist hills parted to reveal a wide basin filled with soft, drifting clouds. They lay low, close to the ground, forming a quiet sea that rolled without waves. The train crossed above it on invisible rails, and I felt suspended between sky and earth, between what had been and what might be. It was a space without demand, without instruction, and in that suspension, something within me finally stopped bracing for what came next. I did not need to be ready. I was already here. The basin of clouds drifted beneath us like a quiet ocean, each slow billow rising and falling as though the world itself were breathing. I watched the soft forms gather and separate, endlessly reshaping without resistance. Nothing here struggled to remain what it had been. Change occurred as gently as rest. The train moved above this living stillness, and I felt as though I were passing through a thought the universe was having about peace. In the waking world, clouds often meant storms or endings of clear skies. Here they meant shelter. They meant pause. I imagined stepping into them and finding not cold or damp, but warmth, the kind that wraps around you in the early hours of morning when sleep has not yet let go. The idea of being held by something so vast, yet so tender settled into me, and I understood that this journey was slowly teaching me how to trust what I could not control. The train did not rush across the basin. It honored the space, gliding with reverence, as if aware that some places are not meant to be crossed quickly. Inside the car, the passengers had grown even quieter, but not withdrawn. There was a shared ease among us now, an unspoken agreement that nothing had to happen for this moment to be complete. I felt no anticipation, no impatience, only a gentle continuity, as though I had always been here and always would be, moving without striving, resting without stopping. And in that feeling, I sensed that whatever awaited beyond this place would not arrive as a demand, but as an extension of the same calm that now carried me forward. The clouds began to thin, drawing back like curtains at the end of a long night, revealing a horizon shaped not by land or sky, but by memory. Soft silhouettes appeared, trees that looked like places once known, rooftops that echoed homes long left behind, paths that curved in ways my feet remembered even if my mind did not. They were not exact. They did not belong to any single place I could name. They were impressions, distilled from years of living, from moments that had mattered quietly. The train moved through them without breaking their form, and I felt as though I were traveling through the outline of my own past, not in regret, but in recognition. Each shape outside stirred a gentle resonance within me. A porch light glowing in distance recalled evenings when the world had finally gone still. A narrow road disappearing into trees reminded me of walks taken without purpose, only to breathe. None of these images hurt. They did not ask to be returned to. They simply reminded me that I had lived, that I had known warmth, that I had paused before. Inside the car, I noticed how naturally I now belonged to this rhythm. My body no longer held tension in small, hidden places. My thoughts no longer leapt ahead in search of what might be missing. I existed where I was, and that was enough. The train had not changed me by force. It had given me room to change myself. The silhouettes outside slowly dissolved back into open night, leaving behind a sky rich with quiet stars. The journey continued, seamless and unbroken. I did not mark the moment as progress. I did not name it as growth. I simply felt a deeper ease settle into me, like a hand placed gently on my back, guiding without pushing. I understood then that every part of this ride, every realm, every pause, every invitation declined, had been preparing me for a simple truth, that I did not need to outrun my life to find peace within it. I only needed to learn how to remain present while it moved. The train carried on, and so did I. The fifth movement of the journey arrived like a breath drawn in after a long rest. The air within the car shifted again, carrying a faint coolness, as if the night outside had brushed against something higher, clearer. The stars brightened, not in number, but in presence. They felt closer now, less like distant lights and more like quiet companions pacing the train. Beyond the windows, the darkness lifted into wide open sky, layered with drifting currents of pale blue and silver. It felt as though we were rising, not in altitude, but in perspective. Below us, a vast landscape unfolded, one that resembled the world I had known, yet softened at every edge. Rivers curved like ribbons of light. Cities glowed gently, their outlines blurred into warmth rather than noise. Roads traced patient paths through hills and forests, never hurried, never crowded. This was not the waking world. It was the memory of it, as seen by someone who had finally forgiven it for being imperfect. I leaned closer to the window, drawn not by longing but by recognition. There was a familiarity in these shapes that reached beyond thought. I saw neighborhoods that reminded me of places I had once lived, fields that echoed childhood summers, bridges that felt like crossings I had made in quieter ways, yet none of them were exact. They were impressions, filtered through kindness. The train passed above them without touching. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to look at life without standing inside its urgency. From here, nothing felt overwhelming. The worries that once seemed large now appeared like small knots in a wide tapestry, real, but not defining. Every street, every glowing window below suggested a life unfolding at its own pace, each person moving within their own story, often unaware of how gently they were held by the world around them. Inside the car, I felt a subtle shift among the passengers. Not movement, awareness. A shared stillness, as though we were all gazing at something familiar from a new height. No one spoke. No one needed to. The train carried our silence with care. I realized then that this segment of the journey was not about escape. It was about return, not to a place, to a way of seeing. The train did not pull me away from life. It taught me how to look at it without fear. The landscape below began to change in subtle ways, as though the world were remembering different versions of itself. Cities softened into clusters of warm light. Rivers widened into calm, reflective paths. Even the forests seemed to breathe, their dark canopies lifting and settling in gentle waves. I sensed that these were not places meant to be visited. They were perspectives meant to be felt. Each view offered a way of understanding life without being consumed by it. The train did not hover. It moved forward with the same unbroken rhythm, and yet everything beneath us appeared suspended in a kind of timeless grace. From this height, nothing was loud, nothing was urgent. Even storms, visible as slow spirals of silver cloud, seemed contemplative rather than fierce. I realized how much of my waking fear had come from standing too close to everything, close enough that every shift felt like a threat. Here, distance became a gift. It did not detach me, it clarified me. A passenger across from me opened their eyes and followed my gaze. They did not ask what I saw. They did not need to. Their expression mirrored my own quiet awe. We shared a moment of recognition without language, the kind that passes between people who understand that something meaningful is happening and that naming it would only make it smaller. The train's windows shimmered faintly, as though they too were aware that they were offering more than scenery. They were teaching us how to witness without gripping, how to observe without trying to control, how to let the world exist as it is, layered with beauty and imperfection, without demanding it be anything else. Below, a small town glowed beside a winding river. I imagined the lives unfolding there, someone setting a kettle on a stove, someone turning out a bedside lamp, someone standing in a doorway, pausing before going inside. From this height, every moment felt tender. Every life felt worthy of gentleness. I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with belonging. Not to a place, not to a role, but to the simple fact of being part of a world that continued, quietly and patiently, whether I hurried or not. The train carried on. And I carried a new way of seeing with me. As the train moved onward, the view beneath us began to dissolve into softer layers, as if the world were folding itself back into thought. The rivers thinned into threads of light. The cities dimmed into constellations that no longer belonged to the ground. Eventually, even those faded, leaving only a vast, open sky that felt neither high nor low, just wide enough to hold everything without strain. I noticed that my sense of scale had changed. What once felt immense now felt approachable. What once felt heavy now felt temporary. The distance had not made life smaller. It had made it kinder. Inside the car, the atmosphere had grown warmer, as though the train itself were responding to the calm that had settled over us. A faint glow lined the edges of the ceiling, mimicking the horizon beyond the windows. The space felt less like a vehicle and more like a shared room in a quiet house, late at night, when everyone has agreed without words that nothing more needs to be done. I rested my head against the seat and allowed my thoughts to wander without direction. They no longer formed lines. They drifted in shapes, sensations, impressions, half-memories. I remembered walking home under streetlights, the air cool against my face. I remembered the sound of rain against a window while I lay awake, not unhappy, just present. These moments had once seemed small, forgettable. Now they felt like the true measure of living. The train had not given me new dreams. It had returned old ones to me in gentler form. I understood that this part of the journey was teaching me how to hold life lightly, not with indifference but with trust, to know that even when days were crowded, even when nights were restless, there existed a perspective where everything softened, where nothing had to be solved immediately, where simply continuing was enough. Beyond the glass, a new glow began to form, not bright, not dramatic, just a steady presence like a star that had decided to grow closer. I did not lean forward. I did not search it for meaning. I let it come. The train moved on, carrying me not toward an answer, but deeper into the quiet understanding that I did not need one. The glow ahead did not resolve into a place at once. It remained diffuse, as if respecting the pace of those who approached it. The train entered a region where the night itself seemed illuminated from within, every particle of darkness touched by a faint, living light. It felt like moving through a memory that belonged not to me, but to the world, a remembrance of calm that existed before names, before clocks, before the idea of arriving anywhere. Within this softened night, shapes emerged that resembled doors made of air. They hovered at varying distances, each one opening into a different shade of quiet. Some revealed gardens under starlight. Others opened onto empty rooms with wide windows and waiting chairs. A few led into nothing but open sky. None of them called out. None of them insisted. They existed in the same way sleep exists when you finally stop trying to reach it. I sensed that these doors were not endings. They were pauses offered in advance, futures of rest, possibilities of stillness woven into the fabric of movement. A man a few rows ahead stood and approached one of these openings as it aligned with the car. He did not hurry. He did not hesitate. He simply stepped forward, as though following a feeling he trusted more than explanation. The door accepted him without sound, and the space closed behind him as gently as breath leaving lungs. I felt no ache watching him go, only understanding. The train did not lose him, it transformed him. I remained seated, my hands resting loosely in my lap. I did not question my choice. The journey had taught me that staying was not resistance, and leaving was not escape. Each was simply a different way of continuing. The doors drifted past, the glow softened. And I rode on, carrying with me the quiet certainty that every life holds its own places of rest. Some entered, some passed, all waiting patiently for the moment they are recognized. The illuminated night gradually thinned, the doors dissolving back into open sky, and the train resumed its passage through a familiar quiet. Yet the stillness now felt layered, as though every place we had passed remained present in some invisible way, traveling alongside us. I sensed that the journey was no longer showing me what existed beyond the world I knew. It was teaching me how to recognize the hidden gentleness within it. Outside, the stars returned in slow, deliberate patterns. They did not glitter. They glowed. Each one seemed to hold its place with calm certainty, reminding me that endurance did not require effort, only balance. The rails whispered beneath us, steady and reassuring, and I realized how deeply that sound had become part of me. It no longer marked movement, it marked continuity. Inside the car, a quiet rhythm of living continued. Someone shifted in their sleep. Someone turned a page. Someone gazed outward with eyes full of reflection. No one needed direction. The train carried us all with the same impartial care, asking nothing in return. I felt a gentle readiness begin to form within me, not the urgency of departure, not the pressure of decision, just an awareness that someday there would be a place that felt like a natural extension of who I had become on this ride. And when that moment arrived, it would not feel like stepping off a train, it would feel like stepping into myself. For now, the journey was enough. The night flowed on, and I remained, listening to the quiet, learning how to carry it with me wherever I would one day go. The sixth movement of the journey began with a feeling I had not experienced before, not change, not invitation, but arrival within motion itself. The train did not enter a new realm. Instead, the space around it seemed to deepen, as though the world had stepped back to give the journey more room to breathe. The night outside grew darker, richer, not empty but full in a way that could not be measured. It was the kind of darkness that exists in peaceful rooms after the lights are turned off, where nothing is hidden and nothing is demanded. I sensed that this stretch was not meant to show me anything new. It was meant to let everything I had already seen settle. The rhythm of the rails slowed in my awareness, even though the train did not. It became a heartbeat beneath the world, steady and patient. I noticed how naturally my breathing followed it, how my thoughts drifted in its cadence. There was no longer a distinction between being awake and resting. I existed in a gentle middle state where attention softened into presence. Outside, the stars arranged themselves into long, quiet arcs, like trails left by something ancient and kind. They did not form pictures. They formed feelings, familiar without memory, comforting without explanation. I realized that this part of the journey was not about understanding. It was about belonging. Inside the car, no one stirred. We were all suspended in the same shared calm, each carried in our own way, yet moving together. The train had become less a place and more a state of being, a way of moving through existence without friction. I felt no anticipation for what came next, only gratitude for where I was. And in that gratitude, I understood that the journey had already given me what I had been searching for long before I ever boarded, the permission to be at rest while still moving forward. The darkness outside began to take on a subtle depth, like water seen in moonlight, still, reflective, endlessly layered. It was not the absence of form, but a canvas of quiet where anything gentle could emerge. I noticed that I no longer searched the horizon for shape. The need to anticipate had dissolved. Whatever appeared would appear. Whatever remained hidden did not need to be revealed. In this space, memory and imagination felt less like separate things. They mingled softly, creating impressions that were neither past nor future. I sensed moments I had not yet lived drifting through me like warm air through an open window. They did not arrive with detail. They arrived with feeling, the comfort of a familiar room, the peace of walking without destination, the simple joy of being present in a place that asked nothing of me. The train carried these feelings as naturally as it carried bodies. I realized then that this was what people truly sought when they longed for escape. Not distance, not disappearance, but a place within themselves where nothing was required, where worth was not measured, where existence itself was enough. The car seemed to expand around me, not in size, but in softness. Even the edges of things felt kind. I could imagine staying here forever and not feeling trapped. I could imagine leaving and not feeling lost. The journey had taught me that both were possible. Outside, a faint glow formed, not ahead, not behind, but all around, as if the night itself were remembering light. It was not a destination. It was atmosphere. A reminder that calm does not belong to places. It belongs to moments. I rested within that glow, and for the first time I did not think of myself as someone traveling through a story. I was the story, moving gently forward. The glow lingered without direction, a presence rather than a point. It did not draw my eyes outward, it drew them inward. I became aware of how quietly I existed within myself, how little effort it took to simply be. The train's motion no longer felt like movement through space. It felt like the natural passing of thought, the way one idea becomes another without force. Beyond the windows, the night began to reveal faint outlines, wide plateaus of shadow, distant curves that suggested land resting under a sleeping sky. There were no cities here, no paths, no doors. Only open terrain, untouched and unclaimed. It felt like a place the world had set aside for itself, a place it did not show to those who hurried. The train crossed this expanse as if granted permission, leaving no mark, asking nothing in return. I imagined stepping out into that quiet and standing there without name or history, just a figure beneath an endless sky. The thought did not frighten me. It felt like relief, to exist without explanation, to be present without definition. Inside the car, I noticed how each passenger carried their own version of stillness. Some leaned into sleep, some gazed outward, some sat with eyes closed, not resting, but listening. We were no longer strangers. We were companions in a shared surrender to motion without demand. I understood that this part of the journey was a lesson in gentleness toward oneself. In the waking world, I had learned to tighten at uncertainty, to fill silence with effort. Here, uncertainty was simply another landscape, and silence was a form of shelter. The train continued. And I allowed myself, perhaps for the first time, to be unfinished without apology. The unfinishedness felt like a gift rather than a flaw. I carried it the way one carries an open window on a warm night, aware of the breeze, grateful for what it allows. Outside, the open plateaus began to soften, their dark contours dissolving into a wide field of muted light. It was not bright. It was not dim. It was the color of early dawn before anyone has decided to wake. The train entered this field without crossing a boundary, as though the world itself were easing us into a gentler layer of existence. I noticed that even my sense of self had grown quieter. There was no inner narration urging me to become something, no silent checklist of who I should be. I was simply here, carried, breathing, aware. The rhythm of the rails felt like a lullaby written for motion. Each subtle sway affirmed that I did not need to hold myself together. The journey was doing that for me. A faint warmth spread through the car, not from any visible source, but from the shared presence of everyone within it. It felt as though we were all contributing to the atmosphere without effort, each breath, each still body, each resting thought adding to a collective calm. I realized that peace did not belong to solitude alone. It could exist in quiet company, in shared silence, in the simple understanding that no one needed anything from anyone else. Beyond the windows, the field of light stretched endlessly, neither approaching nor receding. It was a place where beginnings and endings lost their meaning, and in that place I felt something rare. A trust in whatever version of myself would emerge next, shaped not by pressure, but by patience. The field of light gradually thinned, not by fading, but by becoming transparent, as if it were teaching the world how to hold brightness without glare. Through it, a horizon began to reappear, soft, distant, familiar in a way that did not belong to memory but to instinct. The train moved toward it with the same steady grace it had always carried, yet something in me sensed that this stretch of the journey was nearing completion. Not as an ending, as a turning, I did not feel urgency. I felt readiness without shape. The calm I had gathered no longer rested only around me. It lived inside me now, woven into breath and thought, into the quiet spaces between them. I knew, without needing proof, that this stillness would remain even when the world grew loud again. The train had not removed me from life. It had shown me how to stand within it without being consumed. Outside, the stars returned in slow formation, arranging themselves with a tenderness that suggested intention rather than pattern. They felt closer than before, not in distance but in kinship. I was no longer merely observing them. I belonged among them in the same way I belonged among people, one presence among many, moving, existing, contributing without needing to shine. Inside the car, the passengers stirred as if guided by a shared rhythm. No one spoke. No one needed to. There was a subtle understanding in the air, a collective breath before something new. The train did not announce it. It never did. But we felt it. I rested my hands in my lap and let the motion carry me. Whatever waited ahead would not ask me to hurry. And wherever I would one day step off, I would arrive not as someone searching for rest, but as someone who had learned how to carry it forward. The seventh stretch of the journey began with a sensation I could only describe as nearness. Not to a place, not to an end, but to something quietly familiar. The night outside the windows deepened again, yet it no longer felt vast in the way it once had. It felt intimate, like the space inside a closed room lit by a single lamp. The stars appeared closer, softer, as if they were listening rather than watching. The train did not change its pace. It never did, but my awareness changed. I became attuned to the smallest details, the subtle creak of the car as it swayed, the faint warmth held in the fabric of the seat, the way my breath met the air and returned. These were ordinary things, yet they felt newly meaningful. Not because they were rare, but because I was finally present for them. Outside, shapes began to form that resembled landscapes from waking life, though gentler, distilled. A quiet road beneath tall trees, a shoreline at dusk, a field under a wide sky where nothing waited and nothing was missing. These places drifted past like memories that did not belong to me alone. They felt shared, as if they existed in everyone who had ever paused long enough to notice the world. I understood that this part of the journey was about recognition, not of where I was going, but of what I already carried. The calm I had found was no longer tied to the train. It did not depend on the night or the stars or the endless rails. It had become a way of inhabiting myself, a way of moving through moments without resistance. Inside the car, the passengers seemed subtly changed. Faces looked softer, postures more open. Even those who slept appeared to rest more deeply, as though the train were no longer carrying only their bodies, but their burdens as well. I realized that this journey was preparing me for return, not to a station, to a life. One that would still contain noise and schedules and days that asked too much. But now, beneath all of that, there would remain a quiet track, an inner rail I could follow whenever I needed to remember how to be carried. The train continued. And I rode, no longer wondering if it would ever stop, but knowing that wherever I went next, this motion would remain within me, steady and kind. The landscapes outside grew warmer in tone, as though the night itself were remembering the colors of morning. Blues softened into deep violets, then into gentle shades of amber that did not yet belong to day. Nothing brightened suddenly. Everything unfolded the way breath does when you wake slowly, without demand, without edge. The train moved through this gradual shift as naturally as it had moved through darkness, and I felt the same change occurring within me. I noticed a quiet anticipation among the passengers, not of arrival, but of readiness. People stirred more often now. Some sat upright, stretching their hands. Others gazed out with expressions that held both peace and purpose. It was not the look of those eager to leave, but of those who understood they could. The journey had not ended. It had ripened. Outside, the scenes began to resemble places that might exist just beyond the edge of waking. A small bridge over still water, a narrow street glowing beneath early lamps, a hill where tall grass bent in slow waves. These were not destinations offered by the train. They were echoes of places we would one day recognize when we saw them in our own lives. I realized that the train was no longer showing me where I could go. It was teaching me how to recognize when I had already arrived. The rhythm of the rails felt steadier than ever, like a promise that would continue long after I stepped away from it. I understood that this motion would not end when I left the car. It would become the way I walked through rooms, the way I paused before speaking, the way I breathed when the world felt too loud. Across the aisle, the child opened their eyes again and smiled, as though greeting a familiar morning. That small gesture carried more meaning than any farewell. It told me that nothing here was meant to be clung to. It was meant to be carried forward. The train continued into a gentler light. And I felt myself becoming someone who could meet whatever waited beyond the doors, not with urgency, not with fear, but with the same calm motion that had carried me through the endless night. The light beyond the windows no longer belonged solely to night. It was not day, either. It was the soft in-between, the hour when the world seems to pause before remembering itself. The sky held layers of color that did not rush to name themselves: pearl, lavender, pale gold. The train passed through this quiet gradient as though it had always known it would one day arrive here. I felt no sense of ending, only approach. Inside me, something gently aligned. The calm I had gathered did not feel fragile. It felt settled, like a stone placed carefully at the center of a river. The water could move around it forever without dislodging it. I understood that the stillness I carried was no longer borrowed from the train. It was mine. The passengers seemed to sense this as well. Some gathered their belongings, though there was no station in sight. They did so unhurriedly, with the same care one uses when folding a blanket at dawn. Others remained seated, content to let the moment stretch. There was no right way to be here. That was the lesson. Outside, the landscapes grew simpler. No impossible cities, no floating paths, just open fields, quiet lakes, long roads winding through gentle hills. They felt close enough to step into, as if the world were preparing to receive us again in familiar form. Yet nothing opened, nothing signaled departure. The train was teaching us something final before release. That return is not a rupture, it is a continuation. I rested my hands on my knees and breathed. Each inhale carried the promise of movement. Each exhale carried permission to remain. The two no longer opposed each other. They belonged together. For the first time since boarding, I imagined myself stepping off, not with hesitation, with gratitude. Wherever that moment would occur, it would not feel like leaving a dream. It would feel like bringing one home. The train entered a stretch of quiet so complete it felt ceremonial. The rails still whispered, the car still swayed, yet everything else seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the light settled into a calm, early glow, the kind that appears before the world remembers how loud it can be. Fields drifted past in long, unbroken lines. A river curved gently through them, reflecting the pale sky without disturbance. There were no signs, no stations, no borders. Just land, open and waiting. I felt something loosen in my chest, not relief, not anticipation, but acceptance. The kind that comes when you stop measuring where you are against where you think you should be. The journey had stripped that habit from me without force. It had replaced it with trust. The passengers moved softly now. Some stood and stretched, not because they were told to, but because their bodies had begun to remember motion in the waking world. Others remained seated, eyes half closed, savoring the final layers of quiet. No one rushed, no one clung. We were learning how to carry the calm forward instead of leaving it behind. Outside, a narrow path appeared beside the tracks, winding through tall grass toward a cluster of distant trees. It did not connect to the train. It simply existed parallel, as if saying, "You can walk now, or later, or never. The world will wait either way." I realized that stepping off this train would not be an act of courage, it would be an act of recognition. The train had never been separate from life. It had been life, slowed to a pace that allowed me to see it. And now, as the light grew steadier and the landscapes more familiar, I understood that the night's work was nearly complete, not because it was ending, because it had taught me how to continue. The morning light that was not yet morning continued to widen, brushing the world with a softness that felt like forgiveness. The fields beyond the window no longer shifted in impossible ways. They resembled places I might one day walk, ground that would answer my steps, air that would carry sound again. Birds did not yet appear, but I sensed they could. Houses did not yet rise, but I felt where they might. The world was returning to itself, and I was returning with it. Inside the car, the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of deep night. It was the hush of early hours, when even time seems reluctant to speak. I became aware of how awake I felt without being alert, how present I was without being tense. The train had taught my body a new way of resting inside motion. I thought of all the nights I had rushed through, all the mornings I had greeted with weight already on my shoulders. None of them had been wrong. They had simply been fast. And now I knew another rhythm existed beneath them, one I could return to whenever I remembered how. The rails carried us onward, steady and kind. I did not know how many more stretches remained. I did not ask. The need to measure had left me. Whether I rode for moments or for ages, the journey had already done what it came to do. It had reminded me that I did not need to outrun my days. I only needed to learn how to arrive inside them. The train moved through the gentle light. And I moved with it, no longer waiting for an end, but ready for whatever beginning would open quietly ahead. The final stretch of the journey did not announce itself as final. It arrived the way everything on this train arrived, quietly, without insistence. The light outside settled into a gentle clarity, no longer night, not yet day, but something that felt like the world inhaling before speech. The horizon no longer shimmered with impossible places. It held fields, sky, and distance in familiar harmony. Nothing here was extraordinary. And that, I realized, was the gift. The train did not slow, but I felt a difference, not in motion, in meaning. Every sway of the car now felt like a heartbeat I recognized. Every whisper of rail against rail sounded like a language I had learned in sleep. I was no longer a visitor in this moving world. I was part of its rhythm. The calm I carried did not belong to the night anymore. It belonged to me. Passengers rose more often now. Not to leave, there was still no station, but to stand in themselves. They stretched. They smiled softly. Some spoke in low voices, not to exchange plans, but to acknowledge presence. A woman thanked another for a blanket she had never noticed borrowing. A man laughed quietly at a memory he had just remembered. The car felt like a room in which people were waking together, unafraid of what waited beyond the walls. Outside, a narrow road appeared, running beside the tracks. It curved gently through tall grass and disappeared into trees that stood patient and still. The road did not touch the train. It did not need to. It existed as possibility, not command. I understood then what the endless night had been preparing me for, not departure. Return to rooms and streets and ordinary mornings. Return to conversations and choices and days that would sometimes feel too full. But now, beneath all of that, there would be this rhythm, this inner rail, this memory of being carried without being rushed. The train had not taken me away from life. It had taught me how to meet it gently. I rested my hands on my knees and breathed. The light outside grew steadier. The world felt near, not threatening, not demanding, just waiting. And when someday a door would open for me, whether on this train or in a quiet moment of waking life, I knew I would recognize it, not by fear, not by urgency, but by the same calm that had carried me through the endless night. The train continued alongside the narrow road, both moving in the same direction, neither leading nor following. I watched the grass ripple, as if stirred by a breeze I could almost feel through the glass. The trees ahead no longer felt distant or symbolic. They felt real in the way a place feels when you are about to step into it. Not dramatic, not mysterious, simply there. I realized that this was the quiet truth beneath every part of the journey. Nothing extraordinary was required for meaning. The endless night, the floating cities, the doors of light, they had not been escapes from the ordinary. They had been teachers. They had shown me how much gentleness already existed in the world I thought I needed to leave behind. Inside the car, the calm had matured into something steadier than wonder. It had become readiness, not the sharp kind that tightens the chest, but the open kind that feels like standing in a doorway with no rush to cross it. I felt prepared to meet sound again. Prepared to meet motion that did not glide. Prepared to meet days that would sometimes forget to be kind. Because now I knew where kindness lived. It lived in breath, in pauses, in the way you let a moment finish itself. The train had given me that knowledge without speaking it. Outside, the road curved away from the tracks and vanished into the trees. The train did not follow. It did not need to. I understood that this was how return worked, not with a stop, not with an ending, but with recognition. The world would open again. And when it did, I would not arrive as someone waking from a dream. I would arrive as someone who remembered how to move gently inside it. The light strengthened just enough to reveal small details along the passing land, a fence leaning in quiet patience, a stone half buried in earth, a shallow stream catching the pale sky and holding it without distortion. These were not grand sights. They were the kinds of things a person might pass every day without noticing. And yet, after the journey I had taken, each one felt like a quiet miracle. I saw how much of life had always been gentle, not in the loud ways people talk about beauty, but in the unnoticed ways. In how the ground accepts footsteps, in how water waits for light, in how morning never demands that anyone be ready for it. The train moved beside this world without touching it, as if giving me time to remember how to see. Inside the car, conversations remained hushed. Not because silence was required, but because no one felt the need to fill it. A few passengers shared small smiles. One person gazed out with eyes that reflected more than scenery. They reflected understanding. We had all traveled through the same night, even if our inner paths had differed. We carried the same quiet now, I thought of the moment I had boarded, tired in a way sleep alone could not fix. I had believed I was running from something. Now I understood I had been running toward a gentler way of being. The train had not healed me. It had reminded me that I was never broken. The rails whispered beneath us, steady and faithful. I imagined hearing that sound in my waking life, in the rhythm of footsteps on a sidewalk, in the hum of a distant road, in the quiet breath between thoughts. I would recognize it now. The journey had not ended. It had simply taught me how to continue. The world outside continued to reveal itself in small, honest ways. A cluster of wildflowers along a ditch, a wooden bridge crossing a narrow stream, the shadow of a bird passing over open grass. None of it asked to be admired. It simply existed, complete in its quiet purpose. I felt a tenderness toward these ordinary things that surprised me. They were no longer background. They were invitations, reminders that meaning does not announce itself. It waits to be noticed. Inside the train, the light grew warmer. Not brighter, just kinder. It settled into the corners of the car, into the fabric of the seats, into the space between us. I realized that I was no longer thinking in chapters. The story had stopped feeling like something unfolding in front of me and started feeling like something living inside me. I no longer wondered how long I had been riding. I no longer wondered how long I would stay. The train had taught me that duration was not the measure of anything that mattered. A passenger stood near the door, resting one hand against the wall as if feeling the motion through their palm. They did not look eager to leave. They did not look reluctant. They simply looked present. I understood that this was what readiness looked like here, not a plan, not a push, but a quiet alignment between inner and outer worlds. Outside, the land opened into a wide clearing bathed in early light. The air seemed to shimmer, not with magic, but with possibility. I sensed that somewhere ahead, perhaps on this train, perhaps far beyond it, there would be a moment when the inside and outside matched so perfectly that stepping forward would feel like continuing a sentence rather than ending one. I did not need to know when. I only needed to remember how this felt. The train carried me onward, and I carried the night with me, not as darkness, but as depth. The clearing outside slowly gave way to a familiar stretch of open land, and for the first time, I felt the world no longer drifting past me. It felt ready to receive me. The train continued, steady and kind, but I sensed that the lesson had completed its circle. Not because the journey was over, but because I had changed in the way only quiet can change a person. I no longer felt like someone traveling through a dream. I felt like someone returning with one. The endless night had not been an escape. It had been a teacher. It had shown me that rest is not something you earn at the end of effort. It is something you can carry while you move. That stillness is not the absence of life, but the way life breathes when no one is forcing it. That every ordinary place, a room, a street, a morning, can become part of this same gentle rhythm if you remember how to arrive inside it. The train did not open a door. It didn't need to. Because now I knew that every quiet moment in the waking world could become one, a pause between thoughts, a breath before sleep, a second of stillness in the middle of a long day. Each of them is a station. Each of them is a way back to this calm. And so, as the light outside continued to grow and the world prepared to speak again, I remained exactly where I was, carrying the night within me, carrying the rhythm of the rails, carrying the knowledge that I no longer had to outrun anything. Wherever I go next, the train will go with me. Not in steel, not in shadow, but in the way I move through moments, in the way I rest inside them. If this journey helped you slow your thoughts, if it carried you somewhere softer, then know this. There are more paths like this waiting for you here. Other trains, other forests. Other quiet places where stories continue even after you fall asleep. Each one is another door into rest. You don't have to search for them. They're already here, waiting, just like this train once did.